Hello, everyone. This is Jim Ransom with another edition of Morning Jim Poetry. This one is for July 16th, 2022. I hope that's right. Today we're going to focus on black poets of the so-called Harlem Renaissance. That was a time beginning in the 1920s after World War I when many Negroes, as they were called then and called themselves, moved up to the north to work in the defense industries, and then after the war, they stayed put. Many of them in big cities such as New York, where they felt less harassed by the prevailing separate but equal, so-called separate but equal demand that was still operated but often disregarded in progressive cities such as New York. A core of intellectual life quickly expanded in New York's Harlem, and there were a lot of musicians, poets, novelists, actors, actresses, and this allowed people such as the poet Countee Cullen to attend quality schools. We're going to start with him, Countee Cullen. He had been adopted by the Reverend Frederick Cullen, who was pastor of Harlem's largest black congregation, the Methodist Episcopal Church in New York City. And after his mother or grandmother caregiver died, he was taken in by the Cullens, and he took their name, and he became Countee Cullen. So he attended predominantly white schools. There were some other black students, and he did extremely well, winning prizes for poetry, and also he became the editor of the school newspaper. And he got the attention of a lot of people who admired his poetry, which he was beginning to write at that time. And then he went on to attend New York University, NYU. His work there was lauded by Irving Babbitt, a Harvard professor of literature who became aware of him because of some poems that were published, probably in Poetry Magazine, which was being published by Harriet Monroe at that time, and is still being published to this day. Those were heady years for him, and he published books as well as poems, and he moved from New York University to Harvard, where he got a master's degree in literature. In 1928, he married Nina Yolanda Du Bois, the daughter of the famed radical W.E.B. Du Bois, and got a Guggenheim Fellowship to study in France. So his takeoff was like a rocket. He went up fast. And then he wrote this poem, which is really typical of his work at that time. It's called Threnody for a Brown Girl. You don't see the word threnody much anymore, but it means a lament. Weep not, you who love her. What rebellious flow grief undams shall recover when the gods bid go. sorrow rising like a wall, bitter, blasphemous. What avails it to recall beauty back to us? Think not this grave shall keep her, this marriage bed confine. Death may dig it deep and deeper, she shall climb it like a vine. Body that was quick and sentient, dearest thought or speech, death could not, with one trenchant blow, snatch out of reach. She is nearer than the word wasted on her now, nearer than the swaying bird on its rhythmic bough. Only were our faith as much as a mustard seed, aching, hungry hands might touch her as they touch a reed. Now that's typical of his work. He was very, very impressed by the English Romantic poets. And that poem I just read exemplifies his commitment to the classic Romantic poetry of the previous century. He believed that it was only by sticking with the English language that black poets could achieve their highest levels of poetic achievement. I'll come back to that a little bit later, because not everybody shared his opinion, and certainly not among the black poets. Now let's move on to the work of a black woman poet who I was impressed by. And her name was Anne Spencer. She had some other married names because she was actually married twice. She was born on a Virginia farm in 1882. Her mother, who was the daughter of former slaves and without much education, was determined that Anne should get ahead in life. And so when she was 11, she enrolled her in school. That was her first exposure to school at the age of 11 at the Virginia Theological Seminary and College. Now it's called the Virginia University at Lynchburg. And believe it or not, Spencer graduated 6 months, no, I'll get it right, 6 years later as the valedictorian of her class. Though she lived in Virginia her whole life, she did get a chance to travel, including to Harlem, and maintained her close friendships with many Harlem Renaissance writers, including James Weldon Johnson, Langston Hughes, and W.E.B. Du Bois. She worked with Johnson and others to establish the Lynchburg chapter of the NAACP later, when that took off. And she served for 20 years as the librarian for the Dunbar, Virginia High School. Spencer's poetry engages themes of religion and the natural world. I'm reading now from a biography of her, a brief biography that's provided by the Poetry Foundation. 30 of her poems were published during her lifetime in such anthologies as the Book of American Negro Poetry and Caroling Dusk. She was the first African-American woman poet to be featured in the Norton Anthology of Modern Poetry in 1973. And then posthumously it was gathered together and republished. But let's read some of her work. I've got it here, I promise. Yeah, this poem is called Translation. Translation. We trekked into a far country, my friend and I. Our deeper content was never spoken, but each knew all the other said. He told me how calm his soul was laid by the lack of anvil and strife. The wooing kestrel, I said, mutes his mating note to please the harmony of the sweet silence. And when at the day's end we laid our tired bodies against the loose, warm sands, and the air fleeced its particles for a coverlet, when star after star came out to guard their lovers in oblivion, my soul so leapt that my evening prayer stole my morning song. I think that's a very clever and well done poem, and it goes against one of the rules that Cullen more or less set, which was that poems should always rhyme. You could see that this is not a rhyming poem. Then, here's another one by her. It's called Dunbar. Now, Dunbar was the name of the town or village or small city where she worked as a librarian. And this is Dunbar by Anne Spencer. Ah, how poets sing and die. Make one song, and heaven takes it. Have one heart, and beauty breaks it. Chatterton, Shelley, Keats, and I. Ah, how poets sing and die. That's a very cleverly constructed poem, and it was published in the Book of American Negro Poetry in 1922, and probably elsewhere as well. So, this is, I think, a poet that probably has been neglected to some extent. I think she's really pretty good, and I would certainly put her up there with Countee, Cullen, and maybe even a little bit higher. Now we come to probably the best known of all the Negro poets, as they were called in their time, black poets as we even say today, Langston Hughes. There's hardly anybody that hasn't heard of Langston Hughes. And he broke a lot of the rules that tried to be put into effect by Countee Cullen. Here's his poem, Po' Boy Blues. When I was home, the sunshine seemed like gold. When I was home, the sunshine seemed like gold. Since I come up north, the whole damn world's turned cold. I was a good boy, never done no wrong, yes. I was a good boy, never done no wrong. But this world is weary, and the road is hard and long. I fell in love with a gal I thought was kind. Fell in love with a gal I thought was kind. She made me lose my money and almost lose my mind. Weary, 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 early in the morn. Weary, weary, early in the morn. I'm so weary. I wish I'd never been born. That was one of his earlier Harlem poems. And he broke the rules there because he wrote his poem and some of his others, most of his others really, in Negro dialect. And he uses blues rhythm and Negro dialect and received scathing criticism for it from black intellectuals. They were the ones that didn't like it. White critics thought it was just fine. A lot of the disagreement came from those like Countee Cullen, who thought black poets should show they could write in excellent English. And of course, most of them are pretty well educated. Many folks have tried to politicize Hughes, but he refused to take sides in most politics. He considered himself a member of the human race, and that was it for him. Just to give you an idea let me read you something that was published by the Langston Hughes article in the Poetry Foundation Literature. His second book, called Fine Clothes to the Jew, was well received by the literary magazines and the white press, but the Negro critics did not like it at all. The Pittsburgh Courier ran a big headline across the top of the page: Langston Hughes' book of poems is trash. That was the opinion of the black critics at the time. And the New York Amsterdam News, which was another black newspaper in the Harlem area, said that Langston Hughes is a sewer dweller. What? So others called the book a disgrace to the race, a return to the dialect tradition, and, quote, a parading of all our racial defects before the public, end quote. Now, the truth is that the public fell in love with Langston Hughes' dialect poetry, and I think the American public still are in with it. The book of poems called Fine Clothes to the Jew was misunderstood and disliked by many people, and it was based on the observation Hughes made of many blacks pawning their clothing at pawn shops in Harlem, most of which were owned by Jews. And that was true for pawn shops all over the country. That was just one of the things that Jews did in those days. Hughes' assistant, Lindsay Patterson, called Langston Hughes, quote, the most abused poet in America. Well, I don't know about that, but it didn't last because we like him today. And I think he's a poet that probably is remembered more than any of the others. And if you say black poetry, it's almost certain that Langston Hughes' name is going to come up. Okay, we've pretty much run out of time now. I hope you enjoyed some of the Harlem Renaissance black poetry by Ann Spencer, Countee Cullen, and Langston Hughes. And we'll probably get back to more of that in the future. Actually, there are many black poets writing today, and a lot of you are very familiar with them and who they are. And since I'm sort of in a historical tour, as you may have noticed if you've been with me, of the 18th, the 19th, and the early 20th centuries, you'll no doubt understand why I covered the Harlem Renaissance before anything else. Okay, that's it for today. Blessings to all of you, and goodbye until next week.